The call came at 6:47 in the morning. Not from work, not from the school, from the hospital. Rowan Beckett was already in his truck, thermos wedged between his knees, when his phone lit up on the passenger seat. He saw the number, Royal Victoria Regional, and his stomach dropped before his brain had time to catch up. His daughter Phoebe was 9 years old and asthmatic, and the night before she'd been coughing in that particular way that wasn't just a cold. He'd told himself she'd be fine. He'd stood in her doorway at 11 p.m. and watched her chest rise and fall, and told himself she was fine. She wasn't fine. By the time he got off the phone with the attending nurse, it was 6:53. He had a 7 o'clock shift at the Barrie Regional Operations Center, where he'd worked for the past 6 years as a logistics coordinator for Mercer Infrastructure. And he had a daughter in emergency who needed him more than Mercer did. He drove to the hospital. He stayed until the nebulizer treatment worked, until Phoebe's breathing steadied, until she fell back asleep holding his hand. He called the center from the waiting room and left a message for his supervisor, Grant. He texted twice, he explained. He was not the kind of man who disappeared without a word. He arrived at the office at 9:43. Catherine Voss was waiting at the end of the hall. He had met her exactly 3 times before that morning. She was the regional director of operations, his supervisor's supervisor, and she did not usually involve herself in floor-level logistics. She was 41 precise, the kind of woman whose office had no photographs on the desk. She had taken over the department 8 months earlier after relocating from the Toronto headquarters, and in those 8 months she had restructured 2 divisions and eliminated a budget line that had existed since 2009. She was not waiting in the hall for a casual conversation. "Mr. Beckett," she said, and that was all she had to say for him to understand exactly what kind of morning this was going to be. The meeting took 11 minutes. Grant wasn't there. There were 2 people from HR, a woman Rowan had never seen before, and Catherine Voss standing at the window with her arms crossed and a file folder on the table between them. The folder had his name on the tab. She said that punctuality was a condition of employment. She said that his attendance record over the past 3 months showed a pattern. She said that she had reviewed the situation carefully and that the department needed people it could rely on. Rowan said his daughter had been in emergency. She said she understood that, and she was sorry to hear it, and that didn't change the situation. He thought about the attendance record she'd mentioned, 3 instances in 3 months, a school concert he'd had to leave early for because Phoebe's babysitter canceled last minute, a morning he'd been 20 minutes late because of a pileup on the 400, and now this. He wanted to explain the difference between a pattern and a coincidence, but the folder was already open, the papers were already signed, and Catherine Voss was looking at him the way people look when the decision has already been made and the meeting is just a formality. He took his access card from around his neck and set it on the table without being asked. He cleaned out his locker in 12 minutes. One of the guys from dispatch, a man named Pete, who'd worked with him since 2018, walked with him to the elevator without saying anything. Just walked with him. That was the kindest thing anyone did for him that day. In the truck he sat for a long time without turning the key. He thought about the mortgage. He thought about Phoebe's medication, which wasn't cheap, which the benefits had been covering. He thought about the parent-teacher interview next week and how he'd promised her a new pair of hockey skates for Christmas, and how those skates suddenly felt very far away. He didn't cry. He wanted to, but he had to drive back to the hospital and sit beside his daughter, and he couldn't do that with red eyes and a face that would scare her. So he breathed, and then he drove. Catherine Voss drove north on the 400 at 6:15 that evening and told herself she had done the right thing. It was something she'd learned a long time ago, the necessity of clean decisions, compassionate ones where possible, but clean. You could not run a department of 62 people on exceptions. You make one exception, you've made a policy. She knew what happened when managers got soft about attendance, about deadlines, about standards. She'd watched it happen in Toronto, had been brought in specifically to correct it. The Beckett situation had been straightforward, 3 incidents, documented. HR had agreed, the union rep had been notified. Everything by the book. She turned the radio up slightly and watched the tree line darken against the October sky. At 6:44, 8 kilometers north of the Innisfil interchange, the car made a sound she had never heard a car make before. It was a low, hollow knock, and then a rising hiss, and then the temperature gauge climbed so fast she barely had time to register it before the hood started to breathe steam. She got the car to the shoulder just as the engine died completely. She sat in sudden silence, hazard lights blinking, semi-trucks shaking the car as they passed. She tried the ignition 4 times. Nothing. She called roadside assistance. They told her 45 minutes to hour. She called a colleague who lived in Barrie. Voicemail. She called another. Also voicemail. She sat in the dark with the cars going past her at 110 kilometers an hour and thought about how visible she was and how invisible she felt. She had been there 20 minutes when the truck pulled up behind her. It was a gray F-150, older, with a dent above the left rear wheel well. The driver didn't accelerate past her. He slowed gradually, the way someone does when they've made a deliberate decision to stop, and pulled onto the gray ball behind her with his four-ways on. She watched him in the side mirror and did not get out of the car. He walked to her passenger window. She cracked it 2 inches. "Car trouble," he said. And then the light from her hazards hit his face and she recognized him. And she understood from his expression, the slight stillness that crossed it, that he recognized her too. It was Rowan Beckett. He stood in the wind from the passing trucks with his jacket collar up and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "You want me to take a look at it?" She didn't answer right away. He said, "I used to do mechanical before logistics. I'm not going to pretend I can fix an engine on the side of the 400, but I can tell you what's wrong." She got out of the car. He looked at the engine for about 3 minutes. He had a flashlight, the real kind, not a phone, and he moved it slowly across things she couldn't name. Then he straightened up. "Head gasket most likely," he said. "Could be the coolant line, but the steam pattern looks like gasket. Either way, it's not driving anywhere tonight. Roadside is coming," she said. "How long did they say?" She checked her phone. 23 minutes now. He nodded. He looked at the highway. He looked at her standing there in her work clothes, the jacket she'd put on that morning in a warm office which was doing nothing for her out here in 16 degrees and wind. "I'll wait with you," he said. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said. He went back to his truck and came back with a coffee thermos and a second cup, the kind with a lid, and held it out to her. She took it. She didn't know what else to do. They stood beside the car while the trucks went past. She held the cup in both hands. He stood slightly ahead of her, between her and the traffic, which she noticed and did not mention. After a while she said, "Your daughter? How is she?" He looked at her. "She's home," he said. "Breathing." "I'm glad," Catherine said. He didn't say anything to that. The roadside truck came at 7:19. The driver confirmed the gasket, confirmed the car wasn't going anywhere, called a tow to Barrie. Catherine stood to the side while the men talked and realized she had no way home. Her car was going to a shop. The nearest rental agency was closed. She knew no one in Innisfil. Rowan Beckett said, "I'll drive you. That's 40 minutes out of your way." "I know what it is," he said. She got in the truck. It smelled like coffee and something else. She couldn't place it at first, and then she did. It was children's shampoo, the kind that came in the orange bottle, the scent of it unmistakable in the small space of the cab. There was a coloring book in the back seat and a single pink mitten on the floor. He drove. She watched the highway. About 20 minutes in, she said, "I want to explain what happened this morning." "You don't need to," he said. "I want to." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Okay." She told him about the restructuring, about the directives she'd brought from the regional office, about what she'd been asked to do and the timeline she'd been given to do it. She said she had been given a specific mandate, 12 weeks, measurable outcomes, no exceptions to documented policy. She said she had looked at his file and seen 3 incidents and followed the process exactly as it was designed to be followed. She said, "I didn't know about your daughter. I left a message," he said. She absorbed that. "I didn't receive it," she said. "Or it didn't reach me before the meeting." He didn't say anything. "That's not an excuse," she said. "I should have spoken with you directly before making a decision. I didn't. I relied on what was in the file." She heard herself saying the words and understood, maybe for the first time, that there was a difference between making a defensible decision and making a right one. Rowan Beckett drove her to her building in Barrie on Owen Street, which she hadn't told him, but which he apparently remembered from some documentation during her onboarding review. He pulled up to the curb and put the truck in park. She said, "I'll review your file again tomorrow." He looked at her. It was the first time he'd looked directly at her since they'd been on the highway, and it wasn't the look of a man asking for something. It was the look of a man who had already accepted that things were the way they were and was surprised to find out they might not be. "Thank you for the ride," she said. "And for stopping. Anyone would have," he said. She got out of the truck. She watched it pull away and stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the dark and thought about what he'd said anyone would have, but they hadn't. She'd been on that shoulder for 20 minutes. Hundreds of cars. Not one of them slowed down. The call from HR came at 8:47 the next morning. Rowan was in the kitchen, making Phoebe's lunch. Peanut butter and honey on whole grain, the crusts on because she'd changed her mind about the crusts sometime over the summer, and he still found it slightly miraculous. He was thinking about EI applications and whether his references at the city were still current. He almost didn't pick up. The woman on the line was named Sandra from Human Resources, and she asked if he was available to come in for a conversation at 11. She used the word conversation carefully, which either meant very good news or very bad news, and those were the only two possibilities when you'd just been terminated the day before. He arranged for his neighbor Mrs. Fillion to stay with Phoebe until noon. He drove back to the Barrie Regional Operations Center. Catherine Voss was in the small meeting room on the third floor, the one without windows. There was no folder on the table this time. There was no one from HR. It was just her and 2 cups of coffee already poured and a manila envelope. She told him she had reviewed his file the previous evening. She told him she had gone back through Grant's communication logs and found his voicemail. It had been flagged as a non-urgent hold by an automated filter, something she hadn't been aware existed in the system. She told him she had also pulled his full attendance history for the past 3 years, not just the 3 months on record, and that the picture it presented was considerably different from the one she'd been given. He had been early, in fact, on 146 of the last 200 working days. He had covered shifts for 3 different colleagues in the past year. His project completion rate was the highest in the logistics division. She slid the envelope across the table. Inside was his access card, a letter on Mercer letterhead, and a check for what she described as compensatory wages for the period of interruption. The letter reinstated him to his position effective immediately, with a note appended to his file acknowledging that the separation had been made in error. "This isn't a favor," she said. "The error was ours. I want to be clear about that." He looked at the envelope. He picked up his access card and held it for a moment. "What happened to Grant?" he said. She was quiet briefly. "Grant's communication management practices are being reviewed," she said. He nodded. He understood that was as specific as she was going to get, and he understood that it was probably the most specific she should get. He looked at her across the table. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes. Last night. Why did you stop? When you said you'd look at the file again, you didn't owe me that." You'd already made a decision. She thought about it. She could have given him a professional answer. She had a few ready. Instead she said, "Because you waited on the highway for 23 minutes when you didn't have to, and that told me something about the kind of person you are. And I realized the file hadn't told me that." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My daughter's name is Phoebe. She's 9. She's asthmatic. When she has a bad night, I know it. I can hear it. I was already in the truck when the hospital called. I hadn't left early. I was on time. I couldn't keep driving when she was there." "No," Catherine said. "You couldn't. I would have worked late to make up the time," he said. "I was going to ask Grant about it." "I know," she said. He picked up the envelope. He stood. He looked around the small windowless room and then back at her. "Miss Voss," he said. "Thank you, Mr. Beckett," she said. That was all. He was back at his desk by 1 o'clock. Pete saw him come through the door and stopped what he was doing and just nodded, one of those nods that held more than most conversations. Rowan sat down and opened his work queue and found 6 days of backed-up logistics reports waiting for him, and he thought, "Good, I know what to do with these." At 3:15, an email appeared in his inbox from Catherine Voss. It had no subject line. The body said only, "There will be a formal review of the automated voicemail filtering system in the next 2 weeks. I've asked that anyone affected by similar holds be notified." I should have found that sooner. He read it twice. Then he closed it and went back to the logistic report. The review board met in November. Grant Thiessen was moved to a non-supervisory role, a transfer that was described in the internal memo as a restructuring decision. 2 other employees who had received disciplinary actions under similar circumstances. Incomplete information, messages caught in the same filter, had their records amended. One of them, A woman from the billing department named Ruth, who'd been written up twice in 6 months, cried in the hallway outside HR when she found out. And someone who witnessed it mentioned it to someone else, and by the end of the week, everyone in the building knew, in that quiet way that things become known in offices, that something had changed. Catherine Voss did not announce it. She did not send a message to the department about accountability or renewed standards or fresh starts. She just did it, one file at a time, without ceremony, the way things should be done when they're being done right rather than being done for an audience. The hockey skates appeared at the beginning of December. Rowan drove Phoebe to the shop on Dunlop Street on a Saturday morning, a bright cold one with the kind of sky that only showed up in Ontario in winter, pale blue, knife-sharp, the light bouncing off the snowbanks like something theatrical. Phoebe had her hand in his coat pocket because her mittens were in the truck, which was typical. She was very serious about the skates. She tried on 4 pairs. She deliberated the way only a 9-year-old could deliberate, with her full attention and no self-consciousness at all. She chose a white pair with a red stripe. "Good choice," said the man behind the counter. "I know," said Phoebe. Rowan laughed, the first real laugh he'd had in a while, and it surprised him slightly, the way a good thing could still catch you off guard after a bad stretch. In the truck on the way home, Phoebe held the box on her lap and said, "Daddy, when can we skate?" "Soon," he said. "Tomorrow? If the rink is open, can we check?" "We can check," he said. She looked out the window at the snow. She said, "I like winter, even though it makes your chest tight," he said. She said, in a tone that suggested the two things were separate and the bad one didn't cancel out the good one. And somehow that struck him as the smartest thing anyone had said to him in a long time. He drove and she held her skates and the city went past, gray and white and quiet. Catherine Voss walked past the logistics division on a Tuesday in December on her way to a meeting in the East Wing. She didn't stop. She had 11 minutes and 3 floors to cover, but she slowed briefly, passing the open doorway. She saw the department at work, the hum of it, the ordinary Tuesday afternoon busyness, people at desks, a phone ringing, someone laughing at something across the room. And she saw Rowan Beckett at his station near the window. He was on the phone, leaning slightly forward with a pen in his hand, writing something down. He didn't see her. She kept walking, but she was aware, for a moment, just a moment, the length of a hallway, of what the room had almost not contained. How close it had come to being smaller than it was. How many things had almost not been corrected. She thought about a shoulder on the 400 in October, steam rising from an open hood, wind from the trucks, a man standing slightly ahead of her, between her and the traffic, saying nothing about it. She thought about how some people just do that, move towards something rather than past it, not because there is a reason to, just because there is a person there and the person needs something and it is possible to help. She'd spent her career learning to move efficiently, decisively, forward without hesitation. She was starting to think there was something she might have missed, somewhere in that education. She took a different route to the elevator, not a longer one, just past the window on the north side of the building where you could see down into the parking lot, and past that the open stretch of Dunlop Street, and past that the gray edge of Heartfelt Bay going into December. She stood there for 15 seconds, maybe 20, then she went to her meeting. That was all. That was enough.